From car cemeteries to boats left on lava rocks, here are 10 abandoned vehicles with jaw-dropping backstories. The McDonald's Barge. In 1986, the McBarge was introduced to the world, also known as the Friendship 500. It was a floating fast food restaurant created specifically for the World Expo of 1986 in Vancouver, Canada. It was a brave idea from McDonald's, who hoped to serve their famous burgers on a boat to hundreds of hungry customers. And while it did work very well during the expo, selling tons and tons of fast food items to hungry tourists, it quickly lost its relevance once the World Expo was over. Interestingly, this was not the first floating barge McDonald's ever built. Their first floating restaurant was actually in St. Louis, Missouri. It was built as a nod to the steamboat era of years past, and while it is a cool idea, it didn't really pan out. The Canadian McDonald's Barge was way too expensive to keep afloat. The plan was to take the floating McDonald's around the world, but clearly that didn't happen. It was eventually abandoned and left to rot. It has remained abandoned ever since 1991, and while the McBarge has shifted owners a few times, nobody has actually done anything with this floating disaster. The owner that bought it in 1999 said it was going to restore the ship with a $3 million upgrade, but that hasn't happened yet. The website for that project is no longer available. Currently, there are proposals of turning the McBarge into a floating homeless shelter. It might become another bar or restaurant too. In 2015, the owner announced it would be reopened as a seafood restaurant once a high-traffic area was figured out. Not sure what's going on now in 2020. The Corepack Wreck. The most picturesque abandoned boat in the entire world is known as the Corepack Wreck. This is a photographer's dream boat, no pun intended. What makes this so incredibly amazing is that it's in a dried riverbed near Fort William in Scotland and overlooks Ben Nevis, the largest mountain in the entire country. It's been sitting there for over 10 years, attracting tourists from all over the world to take beautiful photographs of the lake, the boat, the town in the distance, and the mountain towering above it all. It's actually a pretty amazing sight to behold. But how did this random vessel become moored in such a strange place? Well, the wreck is actually known as the MV Dayspring. It was built first in 1975 as a fishing vessel, but in 2000 it stopped fishing. It was moored in the area of Fort William, then it was caught in a storm in 2011 and ended up in the place where you see it now. Since then, it has quietly been waiting for rescue. For the foreseeable future, it looks like this abandoned vessel will remain an iconic landmark for tourists to visit. Sweden's abandoned car cemetery. Nothing screams abandoned vehicles quite like a car cemetery. It's always a strange experience to find hundreds of rotting vehicles from days past sitting in an otherwise beautiful forest. The abandoned car cemetery in Sweden is slowly being reclaimed by nature. This incredible graveyard of cars was at one point a hotspot for spare parts. Apparently, people would come from all over the region just to get cheap spare parts for their vehicles. The graveyard itself is located in Värmland, Sweden, but it's not such a great reserve for spare parts anymore. Most of the vehicles in this graveyard were abandoned sometime in the 1940s and the 1960s, making most of the parts useless by now. Plus, everything is so horribly damaged and eaten by nature that it would not even be worth it. However, this is an exciting place to visit. The cars are old, covered in moss, and most of them have trees now growing inside of them. The rumor is that many of the cars belong to the United States military, but were abandoned once the soldiers left the continent after World War II. However, this is only a rumor. And now for number 8, but first be sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know if you've ever seen any of these in the comments below. Rusty abandoned ship. Everybody loves an abandoned ship. There's just something so cool about finding an abandoned ship half sunken in the water, as if the entire crew had turned to ghosts overnight. In the Fraser River, there has been an abandoned ship sitting on the water for many years now, and it's become an eyesore for the local people of the area. According to an article from CBC News, the abandoned vessel is a real risk of pollution because its hull is so corroded. It could sink at any minute, and it could even burst into flames. But I kinda like this boat. It's 75 years old, and it has been sitting in the same location of the Fraser River for the last 5 years. This is an incredibly old vessel, and nobody knows quite what to do with it. To remove the entire ship safely would cost the Canadian Coast Guard about $3.3 million. While the costs are supposed to be deflected to the owner in the case of something like this, it's doubtful that whoever owns the boat and left it to rot in the middle of the river is going to pay up $3.3 million to have it removed. If you're in the area of Surrey, BC, definitely check out this cool ghost ship just kinda relaxing in the Fraser River before it's gone. Abandoned Volkswagen camper. I don't know too many people who have not at least once held dreams of living in a camper, constantly living on the road, living in nature, and living a free life. And nothing captures this dream better than the 1979 Volkswagen camper van. But even though this is a serious dream for a lot of people, it's also a failed dream. Take this Volkswagen camper, for example. It had been sitting abandoned in a field for years, likely the byproduct of a failed life journey. but it was moved in 2020 to Skipton in the United Kingdom. A local businessman transformed the abandoned camper van into a moving monument to the city in an attempt to boost tourism in the area during COVID-19. According to the man who purchased the camper van, Andrew Meir, the van only had about 40,000 kilometers on it. Still, it was in terrible condition. He had to fix it up, then give the van an incredible makeover. It's now decorated with beautiful graphics that show famous landmarks of Skipton, such as Skipton Castle, High Street House, and the small UK town's cobbled streets. And yes, it still runs. Soviet MD-160 Ekranoplan. A lot of people think the Boeing 747 is one of the largest planes in the world, and while that may be true, the MD-160 is way bigger. It's like the difference between an elephant and a pig. The aircraft was built as part of a Soviet program back in the 1980s. It worked by using a cushion of air beneath its wings to speed over the surface of the ocean at about 13 feet, making it super hard to detect. It basically skimmed the surface, however the technology was a little bit bizarre and it never really took off. But you can now see one of these incredible Soviet planes from the 1980s sitting abandoned on the shore of the Caspian Sea. It had been neglected ever since the 1990s in an old Soviet naval base, but it was recently hauled out of the naval base, towed for 14 hours across the Caspian Sea, and left beached on the shore as a very cool tourist attraction. This airplane looks like some kind of weird futuristic spacecraft from a bad sci-fi movie, but it's very real, and it's now totally free to look at sitting on the shores on northern Russia. Abandoned cruise ship. The MS Lord Selkirk II was once a beautiful ferry. However, after the owners went bankrupt about 25 years ago, they abandoned it. They left the boat in the Red River, quit the whole situation, and left the city of Selkirk to share their ridiculous costs of removing the ferry. The boat had at one point been used as an excursion vessel to take people up and down the Red River. It was built in 1969, and during its major days, it would take about 130 passengers up and down the river and around Lake Winnipeg on expensive excursions. But obviously, they weren't expensive enough as the owners went bankrupt. It costed $400,000 for the city to remove and dispose of this neglected ferry, but the mayor of the town said it was well worth it to get rid of such an ugly eyesore. Abandoned cocaine plane. How much cocaine can you fit in a single airplane? The answer is about $14 million worth. Recently, the Mexican military discovered a small abandoned airplane on a secret airstrip that contained about $14 million in cocaine. For those who don't typically purchase that much at one time, it's about 358 kilograms of cocaine divided between 10 massive bags. According to the Daily Mail, no arrests were made as the small plane had been abandoned when it was found. The only question is, what kind of lunatic would abandon such a valuable aircraft? It all started when intelligence reports revealed suspicious activity in the southern state of Chiapas, which is on the border with Guatemala. A team was then deployed by helicopter, a secret runway was found, and on the secret runway, there sat an abandoned airplane absolutely full of cocaine. They also found 14 canisters of jet fuel and 2 abandoned motorcycles. Abandoned trailers of the Salton Sea. One of the coolest places in California is the Salton Sea, but don't let the name confuse you, it's not much of an ocean. This is a desert oasis that has been attracting vacationers, nomadic people, RV enthusiasts, and roving tribes of tourists for years. And even though the Salton Sea has lost its relevance, many of the trailers that had once inhabited the strange plain still remain abandoned today. The Salton Sea is located in the south of California. It was created by accident in 1905 when heavy rain and irrigation canals diverted the Colorado River into the previously bone-dry Salton area, creating a small lake. The lake was salty and below sea level, but it didn't stop a development boom from happening, building marinas, resorts, and even trailer parks. But by the late years of the 1950s, an increase of population, a reduction in visitors, and a putrid smell basically ran everyone off. Now, there are only a few abandoned trailers still sitting in the area, most of them heavily graffitied and heavily pillaged. In fact, the Salton Sea looks like a disturbing version of post-apocalyptic 1955. This is what California would have looked like if the bombs had dropped. Abandoned lava boat. There are not too many places on Earth where people abandon boats on lava rocks. This abandoned boat comes to us from Hawaii. At the time the photos were taken back in 2018, the boat was sitting in a lava field on the side of the highway. The boat was covered with graffiti, it was very clearly left abandoned, and it wasn't very close to any water. According to a news report, the vessel had been dumped on the side of the highway for no apparent reason. The vessel had no identifying marks on it. There was no information about who owned it, but it sure made for a great target for graffiti. Classic disses were painted on the side, such as "Yo Mama" and "Whose boat is this boat?" It even looks like someone tried to paint SpongeBob SquarePants on the inside roof of the boat. In any case, the vessel was eventually removed and Hawaii is safe once again, its lava fields at peace. Which of these interesting abandoned vehicles would you like to visit if you ever got the chance? From Armenian astrological wonders to ancient batteries from Baghdad, here are 10 mysterious artifacts scientists can't explain. Dralamo Sagatos corpse petrification. Dralamo Sagato was a serious fan of mummification, and after taking a long trip to Egypt in 1818, decided that preserving bodies was his calling. Mummification occurs when as much water is taken out of the body as possible before it is wrapped in cloth, but Sagato wondered if he could turn the process around and add a special liquid to the body to petrify it. The outcome was terrifying, but very good at keeping bodies looking like they've been turned to stone immediately after death. He worked on heads, breasts, elbows, and the bodies of infants, all of which had been injected with some kind of serum. Researchers also know that Sagato injured his serum very soon after death, as it had to travel through the veins for its proper effect. Though Sagato's work would have been seminal in the field of body preservation, he chose to keep his notes a secret to the public, who, at the time, believed it was the work of Egyptian magic. His technique died with him, and to this day, no one has been able to reproduce it. Blood of San Gennaro. San Gennaro is Italian for Saint Generius, who was the bishop of Benevento. Little is known about his life except that on a visit to Paciuli in Naples, he was arrested and sentenced to death in 305 AD for his Christian faith. Here the story deviates. Some say he was thrown into a cage with lions, but they knelt at his feet instead of killing him. Others say he walked out of the furnace that was meant to kill him with no burns. At the end of these legends, the saint is beheaded and a Christian woman collects some of his blood in a container. The blood of the saint is mysterious because of its ability to liquefy even today in the presence of saints and 3 times a year. How exactly such old blood can continue to harden and liquefy 1800 years later is unexplained. Additionally, the blood failing to liquefy has coincided with many calamities and disasters, including a plague in 1527 and the 1980 Irpinia earthquake that killed 2,500 people and left 250,000 homeless. San Gennaro's blood failed to liquefy at the end of 2016, which is a bad omen for Naples in 2017. Lake Winnipesaukee Mystery Egg. We've got a historical doozy for this pick. The famous mystery stone found at Lake Winnipesaukee in 1872. A businessman named Seneca Ladd was having a fence post put in at Meredith, the New Hampshire town near the legendary lake. There, his workmen discovered a truly bizarre object inside a lump of clay that to this day has not received a satisfactory explanation. Shaped like an egg, it's approximately 4 inches long and 2.5 inches in height. Some say it's comparable to a goose egg. It's made from a rock called quartzite, which is created when pure quartz sandstone gets subjected to high levels of heat and pressure. This means it's also substantial given its fairly small size at a weight of 1.2 pounds, so the shape and material are weird enough in themselves. But it's what is on the surface of the artifact that arguably draws the most attention. 8 things are curved onto the 4 sides of the object. These include a face, what appears to be a crescent moon, a deer's leg, and also a teepee plus an ear of corn. That's led some to connect the egg to Native American practices, believing the object is referring to some kind of peace treaty. Another intriguing thing about the mystery object is how it's been bored through from end to end by what seems to be a variety of tools. Why was this done? There's been speculation that the holes enable the egg to be placed on a stake, but for what reason? Apparently, this created a territorial line. Seneca Ladd was very proud of the find his men made. He had a little museum display at the bank where he worked. Sounds like an eccentric place to keep your money, right? And he placed the object in a case there. Was he right to be such a show-off about it? Another line of thought is that the stone egg was made around the time it was discovered, rather than being some ancient relic of a long time past. The workmanship suggests late 19th century tools were used to fashion this glorious mystery item. And with that, we're gonna lay that one to rest. Sorry, we've cracked. And now for number 7, but first, have you subscribed yet? If not, we'd love to have you here and let us know what your favorite discovery is in the comments below. Karahunge. Ancient stones are among the greatest puzzles for archaeologists. Aside from details such as carvings, inscriptions, or holes, there's very little to go on regarding chunks of rock that are thousands of years old. Karahunge is a definite case in point. Located in South Armenia in the Syunik province, it's a stone circle to rival England's legendary Stonehenge. Karahunge, which means speaking stones, has been referred to as the Armenian Stonehenge, not to be confused with Karahunge. Comprised of 223 stones that are arranged in a circle, it came to the modern world's attention in 1984 and has been a source of speculation ever since. There's major disagreements over what the site was used for back in the day. Believed to be in the region of 7,500 years old, one group claims it's an ancient observatory. This seems to be due to many of the stones featuring holes that could be aligned to the heavens. Another group say that's a load of historical hooey. For them, Karahunge represents a settlement of some kind, possibly part of a city wall. These groups reportedly agreed to work together late last year. Though we're thinking COVID-19 has probably thrown a big spanner in the works. One thing's for sure, the facts about Karahunge are not set in stone. Bighorn Medicine Wheel. Medicine wheels are an important part of Native American tradition and ritual. One incredible example is the Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming. It's in the Bighorn National Forest, but you can't miss it. Just look for an 82-foot wide formation of white limestone. This wheel is the biggest of its kind in North America. Inside the wheel are 28 spokes and also 7 cairns or circles. A large cairn occupies the center of the wheel and there are 6 smaller ones around it. Bighorn is a sacred spot. Various tribes like the Crow, Lakota Sioux, and Blackfoot go to the wheel in order to take part in ceremonies and vision quests where contact is made with the spirits. The big questions, of course, are who made the wheel in the first place and what is its ultimate purpose. Native Americans say the spot has been visited for 7,000 years. Analysis was made on some of the wood in one of the cairns, revealing a possible date of 1760 CE going by the tree rings. Others claim the wheel is an observatory. Another one? What is it about ancient artifacts and observatories? Am I right? Jade Cylinder. China has some of the most fascinating ancient history on the planet. A lot of stuff we take for granted now has its origins with the Chinese and their ingenuity. But as with any long-standing country, new details are waiting to be uncovered, which is where this dude comes in. Carved onto the side of a Kong, or Jade Cylinder, he's pulling one heck of a face while riding some type of ancient creature. The world found out about the cylinder through a BBC series that was filming in China last year. It's square-shaped, but inside there's a kind of tube. The cylinder weighs a reported 6.5 kilograms. So what is the real story behind this artifact and its dramatic depiction of a man in a headdress with his monster? We know it was found in a cemetery belonging to a society called the Langshu from late Neolithic times, 3rd millennium BC. The cemetery was built for what are described as elite members of the Langshu. It definitely looks like there was a sophisticated culture living here, with other fascinating artifacts being uncovered. That calls into question the status of a group called the Shang from the 2nd millennium BC, who are thought to be the country's oldest dynasty. As for the mystery rider and monster, they could be connected to the figure of the Taoshi, a figure with bulging eyes who appears on artifacts from the Shang dynasty. Whoever they are, this find potentially changes the game for Chinese history. London Hammer. Here's a puzzling artifact from ancient times that might not be what it seems. There has been much debunking of the so-called London Hammer or London artifact, but what's the story behind it? We'll tell the tale and let you decide for yourselves. For starters, the object was not found in London, England, but London, Texas. Back in the 1930s, a couple called the Hans were out for a walk in the area of Red Creek. Passing a ledge by a waterfall, they noticed a loose rock nodule and decided to take it home. The nodule had some wood protruding from it. When their son cracked it open years later, they saw it was a handle attached to a hammer embedded in the rock. Curious, but hardly a major mystery, they probably thought. That all changed decades later in the 1980s when the young Earth creationist Carl Baugh bought the nodule. He believed the tools were evidence of ancient and advanced technology. How so? Because the rock at Red Creek dates back thousands of years. Sounds intriguing, right? The reason this idea is unlikely, however, is that Baugh assumed the nodule was part of the original rock. For some, the hammer is actually embedded in a 19th century concretion formed from minerals and evaporating water. Still, it's cool to think the hammer might be evidence of an unknown and advanced civilization, huh? Face from Cape and Rage. This strange object was found at Cape and Rage, New Brunswick, Canada in 1998. Kinda looks like a melted chess piece, doesn't it? It's carved from bone. The mandible of a white deer, to be precise. Knowing that makes it rather gruesome, but then lots of things were made from bones in ancient times, right? Who exactly is this 5-centimeter high fella? Going back to the place where he was found, he does not look so much enraged as downright spooked. Dr. David Black, the man who studied the artifact, got a surprise when the Cape and Rage face landed on his desk. That's cause the person who discovered it was not a professor or anyone like that, but a lucky anthropology student. Dr. Black concluded that the artifact was approximately half a century old and was probably made by an Aboriginal person. The supernatural nature of the object suggests it had a spiritual significance perhaps. Could it have been property of a healer or someone like that? Interestingly, archaeology on a shoreline is limited, as obviously the sea will wash a lot of stuff away. So whatever it is, this is one fascinating little find. Baghdad Battery. Could what we know as a battery have been invented a couple of thousand years earlier than we thought? That's the idea behind the so-called Baghdad Battery, a 2,200-year-old artifact discovered in Iraq 1938. From the outside, it looks like a terracotta pot. Inside, however, is a whole different story. 5.5 inches high and 3 inches wide, it reveals possible evidence of advanced tech. How so? The jar contains a rolled-up copper sheet. At the top is a plug made of asphalt that holds it in, and there's asphalt and a copper disc at the bottom of the roll. Completing the unusual design is an iron rod which goes through the plug and into the sheet, though it does not come into contact with it. Wilhelm Koenig, an archaeologist from Germany, stumbled upon the jar. He reckoned it was an early form of battery. We know the battery was invented by Galvani and Volta, though this was 2,000 years after the jar was produced. If the jar is a battery, then it would likely have been filled with lemon juice or vinegar or something acidic, creating a mild current of 1 to 2 volts through the connections. What was the electricity used for? Medical treatments, electroplating, as in the coating of objects on the metal? Some think Koenig is mistaken and that the jar is in fact just a plain old storage vessel for papyrus. Responses to the theory have been both positive and negative. Get it? Wow, that joke was a shocker. Anticathera Mechanism. Many of you probably know about this already, but this mechanism continues to amaze scientists and historians alike. This super curious object was discovered in a Roman shipwreck in 1901. It appears to contain a group of over 30 bronze gears, all interacting with each other, leading archaeologists to name it as the world's first analog computer. The device was being transferred from Rhodes to Rome for a parade led by Julius Caesar. Made from a combination of bronze and wood, shaped like a shoebox, it was pretty corroded. Experts took a long time getting around to investigate it. When they finally did peek inside using X-rays, they were amazed at what they saw. Called the Anticathera Mechanism after the Greek island in whose waters it was found, it revealed itself as a kind of astronomical calendar. It featured stuff like dates on the Egyptian calendar together with signs of the zodiac. The mechanism is still rather mysterious. It appears to be operated by working the gears with a hand crank and consulting a dial on the front which points to specific days. Through this, ancient people could calculate how the year was going to play out in terms of lunar cycles and whatnot. But who built it? The mechanism looks like it comes from either the 1st or 2nd century BCE. Is it a fortune-telling device? Is it a rudimentary computer? No one can establish what purpose this little box actually serves. The biggest mystery is how the ancient Greeks could design such a complicated device in 205 BC when similar devices could not be recreated until the mechanical church clocks of Western Europe 1500 years later. This and the device's incredibly refined design leads archaeologists to believe that this mechanism was not the first of its kind and perhaps another may be discovered in the future. From discarded Stone Age artifacts to the disturbing remnants of a brutal World War I battle, here are 10 of the strangest things found frozen in ice. Hidden treasure. Everyone wants to find hidden treasure. Unfortunately, this is something that doesn't normally happen, but in 2013, an anonymous mountain climber stumbled upon a small box that contained 100 precious jewels, including emeralds, rubies, and sapphires. A mountain climber, can you believe it? According to a report by the BBC, the small box that this mountain climber found was worth roughly $300,000. The man found the box frozen in the ice on Mont Blanc in France, but the story gets even crazier. Apparently, the box actually came from an Air India flight that crashed on the very same mountain way back in January of 1966. The crash took the lives of 117 passengers, but not everything was recovered because it had crashed so high up in the mountains. While bits of the wreckage had been found over the years, the box of jewels had remained hidden frozen in the ice for over 50 years. That's really sad. But what makes this story really extraordinary is that the mountain climber actually turned the jewels over to the authorities. He found a box of actual jewels and simply walked up to a police officer and gave it back. What do you think? Was he honest or foolish? And what would you have done in his place? Let me know in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. If you liked this video, there are many more where it came from. You won't want to miss out. Iron Age artifacts. Global warming is having some pretty strange effects on the Earth. With all this ice melting, so many artifacts that were previously lost are now being revealed. Some of these artifacts are from as far back as the Iron Age. It has been reported that with Norway's glaciers quickly melting, archaeologists have found over 2,000 artifacts alone from the Iron Age, thawed out of the ice. The artifacts range dramatically from simple tools to lost robes, and the reason the area is so densely populated by artifacts is because it was once a popular thoroughfare for ancient humans. This was at a time when people would cross back and forth over the mountains, moving their livestock depending on the changes of the seasons. While most of the artifacts have been pretty standard items such as arrowheads and horseshoes, scientists have found more interesting things like mittens and even a tunic that was dated back to between AD 230 and AD 390. Supposedly, the tunic was found wadded up and covered in ancient horse manure. As you may have guessed, it looks like our ancient ancestors didn't care much about leaving their litter in the road. Fish eating fish. Some things found in the ice are strange, some of them are scientifically outstanding, and some are just fun. A recent discovery by two brothers who were fishing in Wawasee Lake in Indiana has taken the internet by storm. These two brothers found a fish frozen in the ice right in the middle of its meal. I'm not sure how it happened, but it looks like the temperature dropped just as the fish was about to take a bite out of another fish. There is even video footage showing what they found. It appears to be a pike in the middle of chomping down on a bait. This is one of those things you really wouldn't believe unless you saw the video. The best explanation that has been given is that the pike choked on the bass while trying to stuff it down its throat and then died, and then later on both fish were eventually frozen solid. Talk about biting off more than you can chew. This is definitely a cautionary tale to all the fish and all the people out there who have eyes bigger than their stomachs. Lake Vostok. Lake Vostok is another example of the incredible landscapes buried beneath the ice of Antarctica. Back in 2012, a team of Russian scientists drilled through about 2 miles, 3 kilometers of ice and found something quite unexpected. Rather than drilling into more ice, scientists discovered Lake Vostok, the biggest subglacial lake on the continent. And yes, it seems like something that should not exist. A liquid lake frozen beneath miles of ice seems a little fishy, but it's actually pretty normal in Antarctica. What is really extraordinary about Lake Vostok is that it has been completely isolated for millions of years encased in the ice. And after scientists analyzed samples from the water, they found bacteria totally unlike any other we are familiar with. This is a little disturbing, as many people fear if they continue to extract unknown bacteria that has been frozen in the ice for millions of years, scientists could unwittingly unleash the next plague that sweeps across the earth and kills billions of people. If it were up to me, I would urge them to stop drilling just to be safe. What do you think though? Could there be a super pandemic lurking in a time capsule from millions of years ago under the Antarctic ice cap? Let me know in a comment. Graveyard of the fish lizards. Dinosaurs are always one of the most exciting parts of scientific history. You know it, I know it, everyone knows it. Of course, ice dinosaurs sound even cooler. Every dinosaur find is exciting in its own way, but a recent Cretaceous graveyard discovery perfectly preserved inside of a glacier down in Chile is an absolutely astonishing find. According to Live Science, international researchers at the Torre del Paine National Park in Chile uncovered 46 fully complete specimens of Cretaceous animals known as ichthyosaurs. These bizarre creatures lived between 100 and 150 million years ago and were a bizarre mix of lizard and fish. Think about a crocodile mixed with a dolphin. These were some seriously bizarre creatures with insatiable hunger. The largest of all the skeletons were discovered to be more than 16 feet, 5 meters in length. That is way longer than your average dolphin. Not only were their fossils discovered, but because of how well preserved the fish lizards were in the glacier, scientists even discovered soft tissue and embryos. The researchers believe it was a massive accident that ended up burying these creatures in sediment, and then the glacier would have frozen over them. It could have been that the entire group of fish lizards were caught in an avalanche. As an interesting side note, the ichthyosaurs actually went extinct during the global depletion of oxygen, a terrifying event that wiped out a lot of the species on Earth even before the famous meteor strike wiped out the dinosaurs. Otzi the Iceman. There's nothing stranger to find frozen in the ice than an actual human person. His name is Otzi, and he was discovered by two hikers when they were on holiday in Austria in 1991. When they first discovered the man frozen in ice, the two holiday makers reported him as being the victim of a mountaineering accident, but they had no clue that the man that they had just discovered was extremely ancient. Radiocarbon dating places Otzi at being frozen somewhere around 3300 BCE. For those who don't want to do the math, that's about 5300 years ago, making Otzi a very real frozen caveman. Since his discovery in 1991, Otzi has been studied a lot. It turns out that he has somewhere around 19 relatives currently living in Austria, with a bloodline passed down through 5,000 years. Studies also showed that he had a pretty rough time when alive. He suffered from gallstones, gum disease, frostbite, and he likely had Lyme disease. But he also had a lot in common with us. Apparently, Otzi was covered in tattoos. He even carried with him some souvenirs. Alongside his body was found an axe that was carried all the way from Tuscany, hundreds of miles from the spot where he crawled into a cave and died. It looks like our ancient ancestors were much closer to us than we may have thought. Warriors of the White War. One of the most brutal battles fought in World War I, or in fact in any war ever, was known as the White War, and it happened high up in the Italian Alps with temperatures that were way below freezing. As reported by Daily Mail, the fighting in the Alps went on for more than 3 years and killed over 1 million people, but because of the frozen conditions, the bodies were mostly lost to the ice. However, hot summers in northern Italy are causing the ice up in the Alps to melt, and this is causing the mummified bodies of soldiers to be revealed throughout the landscape. Basically, every time there is a hot summer, more and more bodies are found mummified who had died in the brutal 3-year campaign. What makes this story even more disturbing is that archaeologists must act very quickly to procure the bodies, but not for a reason you might think. You see, opportunistic thieves have been coming across the bodies and looting them of any potential souvenirs. This takes robbing the dead to a whole new degree of disgraceful. The Grasshopper Glacier. Montana is famous for more than just its delicious food. In this state, you can find some of the most beautiful glaciers and ice fields in the world, and you will also find a place known as Grasshopper Glacier, an enormous glacier over a mile long, 1.5 kilometer, and a half a mile, 0.75 kilometers wide. It's located outside Cook City and is absolutely ripe with millions and millions of frozen grasshoppers. In an analysis of some grasshopper specimens taken from the glacier in 1914, scientists confirmed that the grasshopper species had already been extinct for about 200 years. Scientists think that the swarm had been passing through the mountains when they were caught in a dangerous snowstorm. The grasshoppers then died and were subsequently frozen inside the glacier, where they have stayed ever since. If you're a person who has lived in the American Midwest or even in the prairies, you will know how big of a nuisance grasshoppers and locusts can be. They are much better off frozen in ice than ruining crops. At least these ones can contribute to science. Hidden mountains. If you try to picture Antarctica in your mind, you will probably picture a flat landscape of frozen ice and snow. But this is actually an optical illusion. Buried beneath the countless miles of ice are all kinds of incredible features. One of the most impressive is an enormous mountain range almost completely submerged by ice. It's known as the Gamburtsev Mountains, and scientists have known about it for quite some time. The mountain range is buried under roughly 1 mile of ice, and so it's obviously been a little hard to study. However, according to Live Science, recent advances in our imaging technology have allowed scientists to look beneath the ice, and they were extremely surprised to discover not just one mountain range, but a series of mountains with peaks that rose to be upwards of 10,000 feet high. The mountains sprawl for about 750 miles, but the impressive range is almost completely invisible hidden beneath the ice. Now that's a mountain range no climber will ever conquer. Anthrax Outbreak. The #1 discovery from under the ice is surprisingly quite similar to the bacteria entombed in Lake Vostok. In 2016, a terrible heat wave thawed a lot of the ice in western Siberia. With the ice thawed, many buried secrets were revealed. One of the more dangerous finds was a reindeer carcass that had been frozen for at least several decades. According to CNN, this reindeer had been infected with anthrax at the time of its death. Almost immediately after the infected reindeer was thawed from the ice, about 1,200 reindeer living in the area quickly perished. Scientists think that the reindeer died because of the infected carcass, but also passed on the anthrax to roughly 15,000 nomadic people in the area. This was no minor outbreak. Around 40 people were hospitalized because of symptoms of anthrax. This wasn't any normal anthrax either. According to news sources, it was weaponized anthrax. The Russian government had to dispatch biological warfare specialists to contain the outbreak. This is just another cautionary tale of what happens when an unknown virus, or in this case old anthrax, thaws from the ice. Even an accident could have major worldwide repercussions. What happens if the plague comes back? Humanity itself could be at risk. What other strange things will be uncovered in the ice in the future? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for all the newest videos. See you again soon.